Thank you so much, Tanya. And thank you all for joining us today. Next slide, please. We are going to first go over a few housekeeping items, and then I will more properly welcome everyone. Again, this seminar is being recorded. You should have received a notification, and that's so that we can post this to YouTube for future viewing. All participants are muted. However, we really, especially on this topic, know a lot of people have information and questions and comments to share, and so there will be an opportunity for discussion and questions at the end of the seminar. Please use the chat function to send those over throughout the conversation. As Tanya said, we have Spanish interpretation available, and you can choose either English or Spanish from the interpretation language selection below. It looks like a globe icon. Next slide. For those of you who are new, welcome. We have seminars every month, the first Monday of the month, and it's our way of communicating out to all of our partners on topics related to occupational health and safety in agriculture. The Western Center for Agricultural Health and Safety has a mission to improve the health and safety of agricultural workers in the West, and we do this through research, trainings, and tailored outreach. This today is going to be an example of a research project that the center is taking on. Next slide. So this is exciting because normally now is when I hand it over and introduce a guest speaker, but today we have a team here at UC Davis, as well as partners at the coalition or the California Coalition for Rural Housing. So myself, I will be speaking. Heather Ryden, I'm the program director for the Western Center for Ag Health and Safety. Yahaira Ramirez-Sigala is also one of our team members who focuses on community engagement. Dr. Bennett is a professor in the Department of Public Health Sciences here at UC Davis. Dr. Giacinto is with the evaluation team with the School of Medicine. Rebecca Shira is a project manager with Dr. Bennett's lab and has been instrumental to our work in the field study aspect of this project. And Luisa Cafe is with us today from the California Coalition for Rural Housing. So thank you for joining us. We really are excited to share our work so far on this project. And now we're going to transition to a new slide deck. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So again, we are here to talk about the California Farmworker Housing Study. Next slide. The plan for our conversation today, you're going to get to hear from several different voices. We're going to do an overview of the study itself, the study goals. We're going to talk about how we have been very intentional in our community engagement. We'll go over the farm worker survey, in-depth interviews, and then we definitely want to hear from you, comments, questions, and potentially opportunities to collaborate. Next slide. So for those of you who may not know, back in 2022, the California legislature passed AB 1654, and the governor signed it that same year. One of the elements of this legislation was a requirement that the state commission a study to assess housing conditions and unmet need for farm workers across the state. And so we at the Western Center have the great opportunity to work on this project in collaboration with the California Coalition for Rural Housing. So that's the background. Our goal is to collect data from a variety of sources in order to inform policy and housing development decisions in order to improve farm worker living conditions and increase the availability and affordability of farm worker housing in California. So we are conducting this study and we will provide findings to the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, who will then develop a strategy to proceed. Next slide. High level timeline, we're in the middle is I guess what I would say. We were able to sign our contract and get started at the very end of 2023, really getting moving and launching in early 2024. Our farm workers study began in September. Those dates are transposed. I apologize. The farm worker survey began in September of 2024, and just prior to that, in-depth interviews began. We will be providing a report to HCD later this year, and then the final report will be due in 2026. So we are right in the middle of data collection and beginning to data enter and do some analysis of what we've collected so far. Next slide. Part of the early stages of the project was really thinking about the study geography. California is a large state with up to 800,000 farm workers. And so we want to do our best to represent what's happening for farm workers across the state. We're doing this in a couple ways. First, we will be doing quite a bit of administrative data analysis. We're not going to be talking about that today, but we will in the future. But really, because there are large administrative data sets that talk about where farm workers live, work, and some housing related information, we will be able to provide that at the statewide level and then also oftentimes at county levels. Our in-depth interviews are also happening in specific regions, counties, and then across the state, depending on which experts people are talking to. For the farm worker survey, we did have to hone in on some regions in order to achieve our timeline goals. And so those are spelled out here. We're going to the Central Coast, Eastern Coachella Valley, Imperial Valley, Sacramento Valley, and the San Joaquin Valley. And on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the reasons for those choices. Next slide. Again, all California agriculture and California farm workers are essential and important. And so this was a very difficult part of the process, was deciding where to go and who we could reach. We are using the California Agricultural Employment produced by the EDD in order to hone in on where there is large average annual employment for workers. And so you can see on the map to the right, the darker the shading, the more agricultural workers there are. So we are focusing on areas with high agricultural employment. We also wanted to try to reach as many different parts of the state as possible. We recognize that there are unique needs in some areas. So for example, even though Imperial Valley doesn't have as large of a proportion of agricultural employment as some other areas, it is extremely unique because large part of the workforce is crossing the border every day. And so we wanted to understand what impacts that might have on housing. And then we looked to our community and our different partners and to see where they felt that we should go for our surveys. And then we also evaluated existing housing studies. There's been a lot of amazing work that others have done, and we've really been intentional in not wanting to duplicate it, but instead be able to amplify and build upon the work that has already happened, recognizing that we don't want to go to some of the same farm workers or farm worker communities asking the same questions that have been previously asked. Next slide. Wonderful. So now is when I get to hand it over to Yahaira, my colleague who is focused on the community engagement aspect of this project.
Thank you, Heather. So community engagement has been a very central and critical part of our farm worker housing study. And because housing looks so differently across the state of California, and many people are interested in farm worker housing, we first had to define who our primary audience was, who would we be considering community. So for the purposes of this study, we define community as farm workers and leaders in agricultural communities across California. And our engagement strategy really builds on a lot of the existing relationships that the Western Center has. And we continue to build new ones through this project and look forward to, during the discussion, to keep meeting more people who are interested in providing their insight. So within this project, we are partnering with community-based organizations, employers, associations, and different agencies at the state and county level. And because a lot of these relationships already come from an existing relationship, we've been fortunate to have this continuous trusting environment of getting feedback directly from our partners, getting that insight throughout different processes. So throughout the presentation, you'll learn more of how we do engagement in different parts of the project, but we are very thankful for everybody here who has already been part of the process, but look forward to keep having these feedback loops. Next slide, please. So the way we've been doing our engagement has been through various efforts. But one thing we wanted to keep in mind throughout was the capacity of a lot of people as we engage them, understanding that housing is a really big topic, but there's also other pressing priorities within agricultural communities. So one of the ways we did this was through information sessions. And this was throughout a lot of different groups in agriculture. So from our community-based organizations, outreach workers to different associations, where we got to share more about what the study is and start listening more about what priorities each group was identifying within their community, within the region, specifically to housing, but as well as to learn what information was missing. So through these sessions, as well as informal conversations where we got to really dive in to what's really happening on the ground, we're including our feedback loops and helping inform the processes that we have for this study. So one of them was getting input on our survey. We started with ideas based off of these conversations. But really, when we reached out to community-based organizations, really zoning in on the importance of having as short of a survey as possible, making sure our language was as simple, as accessible to different groups within the farm worker population. Being cognizant that the survey was going to be interpreted into Indigenous languages, and that really like doubles the time of the survey. So trying to be um, aware of the different aspects of how the survey can impact worker participation or interests. So we were thankful to really take the time. This is one of the things we've learned in community engagement, that it does make it the process a lot longer, but this is where we get buy-in from community partners, and we really make sure that the survey is being as effective as possible. So within this, the survey, we have definitely learned a lot within the team, how to become better communicators to our farm worker audience, but as well as continue supporting our community-based partners on building capacity to be the ones doing the surveys in their native language to workers, right? Trying to take out the middle person um, and building the capacity within our team, our partners, and create more opportunities for funding, you know. Um, so being mindful that not everybody had capacity to do surveys. We worked with a lot of different community orgs, associations to identify places that we can visit on events that were already existing, trying to limit the amount of workload that we were putting on our community partners. So here you can see on the right side our outreach surveyors, Jocelyn and Esperanza, at a community event. And so definitely trying to find those opportunities to recruit participants and later have that like more in-depth interview or survey. Next slide. And one thing we continue to learn, whether it's from like the pandemic and other opportunities, is the importance of meeting people where they are. We've been able to conduct surveys in the workplace, at community events, food distributions, as well as flea markets and laundromats. We value the feedback that is given on how we can improve our outreach, and this is definitely a place for a lot of other projects to try to be flexible and meet workers where they're at, understand that they have a lot of other pressing priorities. Um, so one great feedback point during one of the surveys closer to the border that a worker expressed to a survey member was, if you want to talk to us, come here at 3 a.m. and we're happy to talk. So being able to be flexible, whether it's on the weekends, early hours, later hours, we've been able to respond to that, and I think that speaks to how far we've been able to advance. Um, as well as this is a place where we hope to keep building for long-term connections versus like short interactions that may be the only time you connect with this organization. And with trying to challenge that typical like research model of like extracting information, but rather we've been approaching it as long-term connections where we as the Western Center cover a lot of different topics outside of housing. So trying to be a resource, whether it's training on safety topics, providing educational resources, or providing PPE, different resources that we can offer to the community that housing might not be the only concern to that worker or to that organization. Um, so we look forward to more opportunities, and we can go to the next slide. And then I will pass it to Dr. Bennett to talk a little bit more about the farm worker survey.
Thank you so much. If you could flip to the next slide. So basically, we have our survey where we want to speak directly with the farm workers to really understand what their needs are. We want to first understand where they are currently living and get information on that. We need to understand who they're living with because in a way that's going to also drive what their needs are. Understand some of the existing housing conditions because often they're very poor conditions that people are living in, and then assess what the needs are. So it's, a lot of background and then really finding out what the needs are as well. Next slide, please. As was discussed, there's a number of methods that we're using to try and enroll participants. Our goal is to enroll 500 participants and have 500 interview administered surveys across the state. We're about halfway there at this point. And now I'd like to go over the survey, what we're covering in the survey. Next slide, please. First, the eligibility. Participants must be 18 years of age and they must work in agriculture the majority of their year, and then only one person per household. Next slide. So, what I'm going to be covering is some of the aspects that we'll be covering this in the survey, and also kind of how we're presenting that data for use. And so as I said, we need to get information about the people, demographics, what's their mode of transportation, as things like that influence where they need to be relative to their workplace. What's their occupation? What's their current housing composition? In other words, who are they living with? And what is their desired housing? As mentioned, we're going to 5 different regions, so all of our summary statistics will be presented both for the entire state and by different region. Also, we'll be breaking things out oftentimes because somebody living in a family with young children might, for example, have different needs as a single worker. And so we'll also be coming up with also other ways to break out the 500 participants so that we can best understand how the needs vary by various situations. As was discussed, we do have a lot of interaction with our participants, and we hear a lot of stories that both exemplify the common themes that we're hearing and also highlight the varied nature of the challenges. And so we'll be reporting out some of these vignettes that are really in addition to what we can do in the survey. Next slide, please. So first, we just have the basic demographics, age, gender, where they're from, how long they've been here, and what language they speak at home or combinations of various different languages. Next slide. And then the housing composition, that's really who they're living with. And so some people are living alone. Some people are basically by themselves, but they're living with either extended family or they're living with non-family members. And then we also have people living with their immediate family. They might have their immediate family and their extended family. They might be sharing a unit with non-family members. So there's a really big range of who people are living with that we're really trying to capture. And like I said, we're likely to anticipate that people's housing needs are going to vary based on who they're living with. Like I said, somebody that's a single worker is much different than somebody that has a family and children. And there are quite a few, the majority of, or not the majority, but there is a significant portion of families working in agriculture. Also, we don't have a direct question on the need for generational housing, but it does come up, and we are capturing when people share that they are in a multi-generational housing situation. So we're trying to capture that too. Next slide, please. So where are they living? So there's the 5 regions, and within each of those 5 regions, we have multiple counties that we're conducting the survey in. So they're shown a map and kind of show us where they live. There's very small towns in some of these areas. So we've grouped together regions of sort of rural, very small communities, areas where they live in more moderate towns, and then farm workers that live in urban areas as well, since many are close to the farm working fields. We're capturing whether they live in the same place year round or whether they move throughout the year. Um, to date, so far, we have most of our people living in the same place. And we ask about whether or not they live in employer-owned housing. Next slide, please. Transportation. Transportation is an important factor because it determines where you are relative to your workplace. We get information on the average time it takes, whether they have one or more than one modes of transportation, and what that primary mode is. Next slide, please. We ask about their occupation and their type of employment, whether or not they work for a farm labor contractor. We also ask if they have an H-2A visa, but we're not targeting those workers, so we're not necessarily getting a high proportion of them. A bit about the job category and the job task. And then we're just confirming for both them and others in their household whether their source of income is only agriculture or if there's a mix of agricultural and other sources of income. Next slide, please. So the housing type is one of the factors. So understanding if it's an apartment or a single family home or something else like a motel room or some sort of trailer or migrant housing or an RV or something like that. And then for whatever structure it is, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, how many other types of rooms might be in that space. Whether they rent or own, whether they rent a room within the building. And again, we also get at how many people are in this structure so that we can get a crowding index. We note that as was noted, we have had an iterative process throughout development of this questionnaire. And we first started out with asking questions like, how many people live there? How many non-family members are you? Like really getting at those end variables that we wanted. But it turned out that that wasn't really a great way to get the information because people didn't necessarily what was the total income of the household? People didn't necessarily know that. So we actually change it. It's much more conversational when we're going through the room and who's living there. We say, in your room, who's living there? And they basically describe all of the different people as a family member or, a friend or somebody that they don't know. And which rooms they're living in, because sometimes people are living in rooms other than bedrooms. And from this basically table that we fill out, that's kind of as a result of a conversation that we have with them on who they're living with, what the structure's like, rent and income and so forth, we're able to then get outcomes that are more interesting from a policy perspective, such as the crowding index. Next slide, please. like I said, we're asking the incomes. Sometimes they don't know the incomes of everybody that lives there. So we do our best on this one. Generally, they know everybody within their immediate household. And as I said, sometimes they live with multiple people. We ask about whether or not utilities are included, and if so, which ones. And then from that, uh, because we are also able to get the cost of the housing, we can figure out things such as the fraction of income spent on housing, which is an important metric to consider. And then we heard that some people required loans to pay for housing, so we added a question on that. So again, kind of getting at this iterative nature of developing our questionnaire. Next slide, please. Um, we originally had a list of, do you have problems with a whole bunch of different specific areas? And it was really taking a long time because it was so varied what the worst and best things were of problems. And so we're just asking for the three best and the three worst things that they live with and then categorizing those. We're also asking if they're living with who they want to live with or not. And if they're not living with who they want to live with, who do they want to live with? So oftentimes they might be in situations that are very crowded and they want to live with less people, or they might have family members that aren't able to live with them because they can't find appropriate housing that would house all of them. And we're getting at the reasons why people are not living with the people they want to live with. Next slide, please. Then we move on to what's really kind of the main goal is what are the needs? And some of the things that we ask are whether they would prefer to rent or own, just so we know that. What's the housing structure type? How many bedrooms and bathrooms do they need in that structure type? And then other important features of the housing. So, how important is having a sufficient kitchen? How important is laundry? Do you need parking? Do you need to be near public transportation? How important is it to be close to health services? So all of these sorts of things, they identify what is very important, somewhat important, and not important. And then once we have all that data, this is a perfect example of where we'll look at the needs versus the family composition to try and understand how those vary. Um, and I think that is my last slide. So next slide. Oh, no, wait, I'm sorry. I have this final slide. So we have completed 320 surveys to date. We have completed all of our Sacramento Valley surveys. We have completed a good fraction of our Central Coast surveys, and we have conducted surveys in 4 different languages at this point. We're actively kind of working in the Coachella area and the Central Valley. Those are the areas where we're really working now to get quite a bit of surveys done. Next slide, please. Um, So as I said, we're working to complete surveys in Coachella Valley and the Imperial Valley. We've had a lot of families take the survey so far, and so we're prioritizing worksite recruitment because we think we're a bit underrepresented. Our population doesn't have enough of sort of the single workers in it at this point, and so we need a little more information on their needs. So we're prioritizing worksite recruitment, and we're working on the data entry and analysis. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to turn it over to Louisa Cafe. She is with the California Coalition for, oh no, I'm having problems with my thing, for rural housing. And she will be providing information on the in-depth interviews and focus groups.
Thank you, Deborah. Hello, everyone. Happy to be here today. Thank you for joining us. So I'll be talking about another key component of this study, which is the in-depth interviews. So our goal is to, next slide, please. So our goal is to hear from groups affected by housing policies to identify barriers and opportunities to building and maintaining existing housing for farm workers. Next slide, please. So we've been talking to a lot of people and statewide and regional experts in farm worker housing. And those include developers. And when I say developers, I'm talking about for-profit developers and community-based affordable housing developers, community organizations, statewide community organizations, and local organizations that serve farm workers, also employers such as growers and farm labor contractors, associations of growers, farm bureaus, and government representatives, and those can be local government at the county and local level, who work in the planning departments or elected officials or ag commissioners. So a broad range of government representatives and also researchers. Next slide, please. So our discussions really vary by group. Because our goal is really to understand the barriers and opportunities to building farm worker housing, and the insights really depends on the interviewee expertise. So we really want to hear their expertise, and we really want to hear their insights. So, for example, like if we are talking about housing needs and conditions, if I'm talking to a grower, right, I will ask him like how labor changes have impacted the housing needs in your region, right? And if I'm talking about with developers, community-based affordable housing developers, I will be focusing much more on the financing and developing housing issues. So I will be talking to, for example, what are the impacts of the budget, of the current budget in the state, right? What are the challenges in accessing the Joe Cerna Farm Worker Housing Grant Program, or the low-income housing tax credit? So really like specific questions when I'm talking to those groups. And policy and regulation too, right? Like if I'm talking to government representatives, I want to understand the new housing laws that have passed in the last year, how they impact specific localities, right? Have they streamlined farm worker housing or not, right? I know that someone asked about coastal zones. And yes, if we are talking to either a government representative or a nonprofit developer or for-profit developer that work in areas within the Coastal Zone Commission, we will ask specific questions about the barriers and unique challenges to building in those areas. So this is definitely one of our questions when it comes like to groups that are located in those areas. And also, and most importantly, we want to hear recommendations. What are the recommendations and success stories? And the recommendations will vary as well by group, right? And if they are developers, we want to understand what are the recommendations that you have to change and make it more accessible, the Joe Cerna Housing Farm Worker Grant Program. So those are like, that's why we have like general topics, but they will really vary according to the group we've been talking to. And so next slide, please. And now I will hand it over to Rebecca.
Thank you, Luisa. At this stage of our data collection component for our qualitative side, we're nearly finished with recruitment and completing our in-depth interviews. Our goal was to conduct about 30 interviews, and we've completed about 28 thus far. And each of our in-depth interviews lasted about an hour long with either individuals or small groups. And participants were from one of these 5 groups that you see here in this table, from government positions, housing development, researchers, community-based organizations, advocates, and growers. As Heather mentioned earlier, our interviews covered areas with high agricultural activity matching, where farm worker surveys were also taking place. But in addition, we are also including areas such as Napa and Sonoma County that were not included in the survey component for just wider input. And apart from our in-depth interviews, our team is also participating in more informal discussions and conversations with those that are interested in participating and providing a voice in this discussion to capture more of those perspectives. Next slide, please. So our next steps is to complete our interviews and especially reaching out to growers who have been harder for our team to recruit. We hope to include more voices and conversations with growers in the coming month, and we welcome any suggestions, especially with those here with us from the audience. So if you have any suggestions for growers or those that might be interested, please feel free to reach out. And after we complete our interviews, we'll start analyzing and coding our transcripts to identify key themes. And lastly, we'll summarize findings within each of the groups that you saw there on the table and across all groups to help guide and inform recommendations related to farm worker housing and housing development. Now I'm going to turn it over to Heather for concluding thoughts and discussion.
Great, thank you so much. I want to mainly thank everyone who we've been working with. This work is really only possible through ongoing collaboration with our partners, and really that means people at the state at HCD, other government folks across the state who we have had conversations with, community-based organizations who we have just had such a wonderful time strengthening our relationships with in identifying opportunities to reach workers. And then grower associations who are able to give us insight from their perspective. So we really truly look forward to continuing to work together and see the Q&A and question time that we're about to have as a first step in that ongoing process, but also really want to welcome folks to reach out to us on the team. I've had many one-on-one meetings with different groups, and I'm happy to continue to do that. Our goal with this project really is to make people aware of the work that's happening and try to enable opportunities for you to share your experience or your thoughts. We will share study findings as they become available. As you heard, we are still collecting data and are really excited to start to look at how it comes together and to be able to make recommendations in partnership with partners as well as the state. Next slide. The most important thing to say is that we are incredibly grateful to the farm workers who have welcomed us into their communities and have shared their experiences with us. Esperanza Salazar and Jocelyn Aguayo are the two survey researchers who are traveling up and down the state. They are traveling multiple weeks out of every month, and they are having really personal and special conversations with farm workers. And without the farm workers sharing their stories and their experiences, this work would not be possible. So very, very sincerely thankful to them. Now we are going to transition to welcoming thoughts and comments. So we have gotten a few, and if I could ask anyone who has spoken to come off, yeah, thank you, Yahida. So I encourage anyone to put additional comments or questions into the chat. I see a lot of community partners are here, so thank you for joining. See a lot of housing experts in the group as well. Looking forward to hearing from you. We did get a question early on that I think I will try to answer, which was our study was designed and launched prior to the new federal administration. And so a question as to whether or not adjustments have had to be made with that in mind. I think really the answer is yes and no. So yes, we are very much aware of local community concerns, and this is where that partnership with community organizations has made decision-making about where to go to do our interviews much smoother. We are starting to avoid large events where a lot of people gather. We're staying away from some of the higher volume places like flea markets and other common public venues. But we are still able to go to communities where we have relationships, and in that way, we are not having a decrease in participation. People are really excited to and willing to share their stories. We just are definitely prioritizing safety, both of our team as well and as farm workers in communities. Okay, So another question was about the coastal zone, which I believe, Luisa, you answered very well. Thank you for that. We received another question about surveying in places that were private, so like laundromats, and how did we handle that? Our interviewers have been really great on the ground communicators for this project and always speak to the management at any private business or location. And so I know that when we were down, I was down with them in Imperial County a few months ago, and we went into markets and we would talk to those owners and get their sense of whether it was a good place to do outreach and whether it was okay with them for us to be there. Once again, this really speaks to the importance of community partnership because organizations across the state have been able to give recommendations about where we should go, when to go to different places. As Yahaira mentioned, when we were down in Calexico at the border with some of our partners from Comité Cívico del Valle, we heard from workers, yeah, it's too late. It's already 4:35 in the morning. You need to be here at 2 or 3. So the next day we went at 2 and we were able to talk to a lot of workers. And that was really amazing. 2 a.m. to clarify. All right. We have another question, and Debbie, I'm going to point this one to you. This might be too early, but any chance you would do this work in Oregon or in Washington?
Yeah, I mean, we're currently funded just to do this work in California, but if Oregon or Washington were similar to doing a similar effort, there's a potential that we could do such a study in those regions.
Absolutely. And through some of our prior work, especially related to COVID, the Western Center has some relationships with organizations up in the Northwest, because really that community engaged approach is essential. But we would love to see this survey and the research extend because unfortunately housing is a challenge across the country for everyone, farm workers especially. Okay. I'm going to direct this to Luisa. As a part of your research, have you compared laws, policies, productive partnerships, and innovative strategies in Western states to identify best practices?
So because of our really tight timeline, we haven't like focused on Western state, but and more on California. We've been focusing on more best practice in California and trying to look at the existing farm worker housing studies to see which best practice they found, and also talking to different stakeholders as well. But of course, like CRH, we have a lot of partnership all over the country. So we've been always trying to identify best practice. And if it's in Arizona or if it's in Oregon, Washington, and even like on the other side on the East Coast, we've been always trying like to be paying attention to what's going on in other states. But we haven't been focusing specifically that on this study.
Thank you. Again, anyone, please feel free to put comments or questions into the chat. I also am going to drop my email address into the chat because we are happy to meet with folks who want to share their experiences or their questions with us. We are also doing that administrative analysis, and part of that will include a housing need analysis. And so that's something that we hope to be able to present on in the coming months. There's really great data available that will layer on top of this qualitative data that we're getting from farm workers, well, quantitative and qualitative data we're getting. Debbie, I'll pose this one to you. Do you consider injuries or incidents related to worker housing? So are we looking at injuries?
We're not specifically looking at injuries, especially since we're only interviewing 500 people, and there's not a lot of them that are living in worker housing. They're that's provided by the employer. So that's not one of the areas that we're focused on.
Thank you. And Kevin, I see your link. Thank you. We'll take a look at that. I appreciate it. Well, so I would love, so since we don't have a pending question, I know that many people who we have partnered with are on this call, and I would love to get comments or feedback about concerns that you're hearing related to housing, or even just your experience working on projects like this with a university partner. We're always trying to learn from that. We are going to be down in Eastern Coachella in 2 or 3 weeks and in Imperial County next week, I think. So we hope to see some of you in person and would love opportunities to continue to revise and refine our process to make community engagement central to our work. Wonderful, thank you. We also would love to connect with Vijas del Campo, and I will follow up with you to do that. They're welcoming more thoughts, more questions. I know we have several housing folks here from the state, and welcome any questions or comments you might have to add to the story. Yeah, Haida, I'm going to throw it over to you to maybe talk a little bit about how we can share information when it comes to our findings out to the community and some of the different ways that we want to make sure both participants, but also our community partners know about the work as we have findings and recommendations.
Thank you, Heather. So we definitely have a newsletter that folks can subscribe to, where we will be communicating more updates on the housing study. So I encourage you all, if you aren't already, that is a great way to stay in touch with the Western Center. And I believe we will most likely be doing another presentation as we get results. So happy to keep in contact. So feel free to add your contact in the chat, and then we're happy to be in the loop of communications.
Thank you so much. And we will definitely host a session like this, maybe in the fall when we do have our findings, to get information out at a broad level, but we also are happy to do smaller community level presentations. I did see a question from one of our colleagues here at the Western Center, Dr. Corsandi. We plan to provide our findings and recommendations to the state agency that is funding us, and they will be using that information to inform their housing strategy. And thank you, Ava, for putting that contact information into the chat. Ava has been a great partner working with us on this project. Thank you for the comment about retaliation and complaints about housing. I think that these are the kinds of themes and questions that are and comments that are coming up through conversations with farm workers at times, and those are pieces that will be included in our analysis and findings as appropriate. Okay, well, I am really appreciative of the time that you all took to join us today. We have another seminar at the beginning of May, and we hope you'll join us again for that. In the meantime, thank you, Claudia, for putting information about our website, our resources. As Yahida mentioned, we are experts here at the Western Center for Ag Health and Safety in a lot of safety topics. And so part of our mission is to share resources and training materials and actual trainings with the community. So please do reach out if you have any questions or needs. And we will continue to keep you updated on this study in the months to come. Thank you and have a great day.